Hello, everyone. We're back again for another discussion on The 12 People You Love by Roy Ice. And we're going to be talking about loving your closest friends today. Or, as he says, how do I love my 3 closest friends?
How many chapters are we doing today?
We're
7,
doing
8, and 9 will take us through the last through how-tos, so that next time we can pick up with...
applications.
Yeah, application.
Let's do that.
You want to do that?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll be doing 7, 8, and 9. How do I love my 3 closest friends? How do I love my 3 church members? And how do I love my unchurched friends?
Yes.
You want to start us off, Pastor Adam?
So Elder Ice makes a point, starting in chapter 7, that Jesus clearly had 3 closest friends. That out of the 12 disciples even, that Jesus picked 3 of them to have basically the ones that he shared the most with, the ones that he did most everything with. And I believe those 3 friends are Peter, James, and John.
Yes.
Yeah, the 3 big ones. That was a bit of a pastor brain moment there.
Well, so with that, I do have a question for your pastor brain.
Uh-oh.
So I know Peter, of course,
Uh-huh.
and I know John the Beloved.
Mm-hmm.
Why James? I don't remember off the top of my head significant mentions of James unless it was James and John.
Because it's James and John, the sons of Zebedee. That
Yeah.
they were called together, and it seems as if they together. Now, yeah, it's interesting because John is called the beloved disciple.
Yeah.
Now, granted, in the gospel written by said disciple. So take that as you will.
Uh-huh.
That is the only gospel where that whole thing is mentioned, if I'm not mistaken. Because John doesn't actually refer to himself as John in the gospel. He refers to himself as the one whom Jesus loved.
Okay.
Probably because he just didn't. It felt awkward talking about himself. Yeah. Or because like later on in his life he kind of wanted to have one last ha and rub it into the faces of the other ones. I'm not quite sure.
Okay. So outside of him being John the Beloved, self-titled, we do see then significant scriptural evidence for this, for John and James.
Absolutely. Peter, James, and John. Yeah, throughout all the Gospels are the 3 that seem to be the inner circle of that Jesus has.
Yeah, I mean, because I could quote you off the top of my head a dozen with Peter.
Peter and John. Peter says the most. Then John, then James.
Okay.
But then Peter, James, and John are the witnesses of the Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John.
Right, that's one of his references.
Out of the 3 of them, 2 of them get closer to. One of them actually stays with Jesus at the crucifixion. That's John.
Right, John.
Then Peter goes all the way to the courtyard of the temple and then betrays him 3 times and then runs away. And so we see that Peter, James, and John are like Jesus' closest friends.
Okay.
That out of all of them. And just why? Scripture doesn't actually say. He might have just liked their faces better, for all we know.
Yeah. And I like that Ice's conclusion is that these were the 3 that Jesus felt most himself around, which I really resonate with that. You know, the people that you can really be your authentic self with, you know, because we all have different versions of ourselves, you know, work and school and different situations, and yeah, I can really resonate with that. The people that you can be the most authentic with. So I really resonated with that point.
If I'm not mistaken, they're from the same area too. And all 4 of them are from the same area, from Galilee. Maybe specifically, like right there on the Sea of Galilee, from that area. And that might have contributed to it. They might have known each other before. But other than that, yeah, it's just that those were the 3, and I like how I said it too, that those are the 3 that he feels just the most comfortable around.
Yeah, that I really resonate with that. I liked his point at the bottom of page 40. They let Jesus be who he really was. Of course, this is pure conjecture. Going along with that.
Well, especially since when Jesus actually tells them about his sacrifice, his death, and everything, Peter straight rebukes him. So Like Peter's like, no, that's you're talking stupid. That's never gonna happen. Like that's, and then Jesus quite straight up tells him like, get behind me, Satan. So, but I mean, I'm perhaps other than that.
I like that larger point though, bringing it into our lives, that we should let people be who they are.
Yeah, I like that a lot too.
And I like that particularly, with this, with my 3 closest friends idea.
Well, yeah, especially since they're your closest friends.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're your closest friends, then there must be things about their personality or who they are is what you like.
Mm-hmm.
And all too often we get this idea in our heads, especially when we're trying to share, quote, the good news with people, that we have to change them, that they have to become something different. Now, what I would say is perhaps there are certain habits that need to change. Perhaps there are certain, because sometimes we get into habits that are not beneficial and even self-destructive and toxic habits.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes those things need to change. And if you have a really close friend, you can actually have honest conversations with them about that sort
I think
of
that's definitely a part of a true friendship is that. And that's actually something I wrote in the margin. Look, honesty equals friendship.
That's true.
Because that's one of Ice's points here. Being open and honest, sharing your successes and struggles is the way that Ice puts it with your friends. And that's real friendship.
Yeah, and real friendship is loving them as for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Not trying to make them either in your image or what you perceive God's image to be.
Mm-hmm.
And all too often, I think that's where a lot of us as Christians fall short when it comes to our close relationships. And that's where we get in some trouble, is that, I love my friend if only they were this or that. Or, and then it's like, it gets a little sketchy.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting taking a little bit of a bird's eye view of 7, 8, and 9. The assumption in 7 is that your 3 closest friends are definitely churched.
Yeah.
Definitely, specifically Christian faith.
Yeah. Which in this day and age is definitely not the case.
I would say generationally.
Yeah.
And I think that again is showing us kind of the generational
and
gaps
the intended audience.
In some of the audience. And yeah, I'm not sure who the intended audience is, because there are some things that definitely feel like a big generational split. With how your friend group looks and how you interact with the church, what you think of the church. The points that he stops to explain or contradict are definitely points that seem definitely generational. Like when he stops to talk to the audience, it's never from something I would have objected to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no,
He's like, now what I know you might be thinking, I'm like, I'm not thinking that though.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that there's a particular audience that he is wondering if they are going to critique certain
right, and I
it.
do understand that. Trying to,
Lord
in your,
knows.
yeah, and in your rhetorical audience, really thinking about, those arguments. That's you're supposed to do that. That's an important part
and
of
when because I preach to a wide spread of generation in my audience on a regular basis, and so sometimes I'm able to kind of get everybody a little bit, and sometimes like one group or the other, right? Sometimes completely, and sometimes I go into a point, and one of my young adults came to me after the sermon was like, was it really necessary to like spend 5 minutes talking about that? And I'm like, well, for some of my more experienced members, yes. You, obviously not.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and studying that rhetoric, for my job, it becomes more apparent to me when I hit things like that. And in your sermons, as you know, I'm always offering my usually solicited opinion. But those are just things that flagged to me just personally when it seems generational. There was one thing that really struck me this time that I really liked, in this chapter particularly, is that at the bottom of 41 he says, we prefer to be the ones supporting our friends, but life doesn't always offer that luxury. And I actually wrote, it's me, with an exclamation mark.
At times we must allow ourselves to be like the one who's carried on a mat by his friends and over through a roof to get to Jesus.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
We all need help.
Yeah, we do. I'm terrible at asking for help, by the way. There's a real moment for you. I'm terrible at it. I don't ask for help. I don't reach out. I don't do any of that. So this was really convicting for me to look at this and for him, to tell you, like, that's what friendship is, though.
Yeah.
Is sharing the ups and the downs.
And
And
each other's burdens. And
I went through and I found a how. Ooh, what the how is. So the how that I understand it from this is how you love your three closest friends is sharing your faith walk honestly, and to make them part of your faith walk, and that's the how. We were getting a little confused in our previous what the how was. I think that the how with the family members is you just be you, and eventually they see God in you. I think is what we got. The conclusion we got to in 6.
Testimony of your life and all
Yes.
that is. Yeah.
I think that 7 is that you make them a part of your honest faith walk, a part of your honest life.
Yeah.
And that in that way they join it, because then you're walking together.
And the hope is with your closest friends, you're already to a certain degree doing this. Now, for many of us who are Christians and Adventist Christians, I wonder if perhaps with our closest friends, sometimes we're reticent to share that part of ourselves with them. We're afraid of what they might think. They already think we're kind of weird because there's certain things we do and don't do. And maybe we're just afraid of what they might think of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think that if you're real about it, and maybe if you're like real about the ups and the downs, if you don't always try to sugarcoat it and make it seem like everything's bright and beautiful and nothing hurts, like, and if you show them, hey, I struggle with this and this and this, and you make it like real, maybe they'd actually be more receptive to talking with you about like spiritual things.
Yeah. Well, and then for me with this, again, I think this is maybe that generational, maybe personal also. But my 3 closest friends are 2 sort of Adventists and 2 non-Adventists.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I mean, the 2 of them that are the sort of Adventists have spent their life in the church, and one of them I know is culturally Adventist more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I actually do honestly talk about not being sure where our faith is. And then the other, your sister, is a lifelong Adventist, but then is married to someone in another Christian faith. So she's sort of stayed both.
And officially part of that faith too, because
Yeah. So that was interesting to me, to look at this and think, do I share that faith walk with my closest friends? With one of them I do, and she's, I mean, she's Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. And then, with Beth we talk about it sometimes. It's never been a big part of our relationship. So, I don't know.
Well, and that's the thing. Think about your closest friends and think about what you talk about on a regular basis, especially if they're not in the faith. Because especially for my younger viewers, a lot of your closest friends probably aren't either in Adventism or in Christianity at all. And so I mean, sometimes the conversation comes up, sometimes it doesn't. In times like this, I think the conversation is going to come up a lot more than usual, because we're dealing with one of these really big, sweeping crises right now, and which causes crises in faith, which causes crises in spiritual thinking, which causes those who might not have been too spiritually minded to become more spiritually minded, to become those who have been, let's just say for the sake of argument, more religiously minded than spiritually minded, to become less so. Especially when we don't have the established church to go to on a regular basis. This is an interesting time that we're living in right now. And so I think a lot of people have a lot of questions, and your closest friends might have those questions too. And then perhaps you panic a little bit because you're like, well, I'm not a pastor, what am I supposed to tell them, right? And maybe that's part of the reason why people are afraid to do it in the first place.
Yeah, and Ice brings that up several times throughout. I think that's one of the best themes throughout the book is you don't have to be qualified, you just have to be genuine and honest.
And willing.
Yeah. That's what it is. And I'm not so sure about the Jesus shut in your mouth like the lion's den reference.
Yeah.
There are, so that you keep from saying something stupid, because I know plenty of people that still say Jesus or not.
Yeah.
But I mean, sharing from that place of honesty and love and care, I think that's all that you have to do.
Yeah, and walk with them. I mean, I think that's the big thing that Dice is saying here is you walk with them and you live life with them, share with them, and I think part of this whole thing is that your Christianity and your Adventism as an extension of your Christianity is not just part of who you are. It's not just this like segmented thing that sometimes you put this hat on or you turn the switch on and then you are. This is part of who you are. It's part of the totality of the package. Remember, Adventists are holistic, that everything is interconnected. And so our spirituality and our religious lives should be intermingled with everything else we are and do. And so if you think about it that way, when you don't talk to your friends about spirituality and religious things, you're actually keeping part of yourself from them. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, well, do I want a full, honest relationship with this person or not? You know? And if you do, then that has to come along for the ride. Now, how you share that, you know, that can make or break it. Yeah?
Yeah. And I think that maybe even looking at it from that way, we've kind of split the two, because they've become very split in our culture between the religious and the spiritual, right? And I think that, again, it goes back to what Ice says at the beginning about, you know, that genuine, what makes me a believer. So not so much the pulling out the Bible quotes or, you know, all that sort of a thing, but from that place of honesty, like, oh, well, when I'm feeling this, you know, this helps me out. You know, my relationship with the creator of the universe looks this way because of this, you know, and so that it's not so much that proselytizing kind of religious angle. It's more of that, hey, we're friends and this is a big deal to me, and, you know, I'm struggling here or I feel really good here and I just want to share this with you, not with that end goal in mind, but
again,
because you want to connect.
I said from the very beginning that we should try to get out that my end goal is to proselytize them. Like that should just, if that happens along the way, that's nice and that's good. But we're loving them. We're starting by loving them and having full, honest, open relationships with them. And then we see what happens. And that's where Jesus and give Jesus a space to work, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So I think we're moving on now to the 3 church members.
Church members is next, yeah. This one, he starts with some interesting ideas about the church in Ephesus. And maybe what they were like. And just the idea that this church was in Ephesus. But we get to the kind of the how-to part, is the idea of the church that we can be bonded and united, right, in the church. And what we're bonded and united by is love. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that love is the truth and love is the doctrine. And love is what unites us. We sing all the time in our family and at our church, they'll know we are Christians by our love, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
And I think that a lot of times we get caught up on this, well, you have to agree with me on this point, whether it be on proper Sabbath observance, whether it be being vegan, vegetarian, or eating certain meats, whether it be, you know, there's a whole wide variety, celebrating Easter or not, celebrating Christmas. There's a whole bunch of things that music styles, there's a whole bunch of things that Adventists can get caught up on. And it gets really interesting when you see church members interact with one another, because I can't tell you how many times church members will just not interact with one another because they don't agree with each other. And that always makes me sad, because I think Adventism actually has a great tradition. Early on, our early Adventist parents, you could say, they didn't agree on a lot of things. As like I like to say, they didn't even agree on the full divinity of Jesus or not. And that's a huge thing. I mean, that's a are you Christian or not thing. And they even were willing to have disagreements on the personhood / divinity of Christ and still consider each other Adventist. And so I think that it's important for our members, and that's why love being the doctrine and love being the key is so important, is I think that we'd get along a whole lot better if we started that foundation and let the other things kind of be bygones. You know, it's like, okay, so you worship Sabbath this way, I worship Sabbath this way. As I like to tell my Intro to SDA classes, is what we have the spectrum of Adventist belief. And there's this, it's not necessarily a binary, and it's not necessarily there's a right and a wrong. In a lot of our things, we have a whole wide variety of expressions and thought when it comes to each of our fundamental beliefs. And according to traditional Adventism from the beginning, that's okay. So I think that if our members were more open to dialogue with one another and more willing to learn from one another, and what I'd really like to see more is younger and older members forming friendships and relationships, because I think that our more experienced members have a lot to share as far as experience and as far as know-how and as far as, and I think that they can learn a lot from the younger generation, and sometimes that's just how to chill out a little bit. And I have one pair that's a friendship I see between a younger and an older member that I find incredibly heartening and gives me hope, right? Where they don't necessarily agree, they don't see eye to eye on things all the time. But you know what? The more time they spend together, the more I see them benefiting and growing and learning together, and that they both contribute and they both get something out of that relationship. And so I think that that's super cool. And I wish we could see that more often in our churches. So young people, my more experienced members, maybe when you're thinking about your 3 church members that you want to love on, try to cross those boundaries and try to see, okay, was there a younger person in this church that I really want to invest in and really want to, or is there an older person in this church that I really like to learn from and really like to build a relationship with? Because I think that'd be super cool.
Yeah, and that's, our how in this chapter is that you're building a relationship outside of church. That's the how. Becoming actual friends. Yeah. Not just,
people who see each other at church.
See each other at church and that you seek each other at church. Becoming actual friends. So I liked that. I did on that last page though, my deconstruction sense is triggered.
Oh, nice.
Because it starts off on that last page on 47. In a world that might look at you suspiciously when you talk about Christ. Yeah, I find it because the audience is most likely the United States. And the world looks at us suspiciously when we talk about Christ because the Christian church is responsible for the vast majority of the evil that has been perpetuated on this planet in the last 2,000 years. That's why they're looking at you suspiciously. The church has done and is doing terrible things in the name of Christ. Yeah. Just constantly, especially for the last 1,000 years, I would say, really.
Well, not to mention American Christianity and American evangelicalism.
Yeah.
The religious right and all of that.
Yeah. It's just the list is enormous. And Adventists can say, "Oh, not Adventists," and we're a young, homegrown religion here in the United States, and
to a certain degree,
and to a large extent, we stay out of that mainstream conflation of God and guns that we see so much in the U.S. But still, we're still under the Christian banner. We're still, and we do have our own sins to answer for. That's. We've taken part in a lot of colonialism, a lot of volunteerism. That's been a big part of particularly Adventism. But so that line reminded me of my fundamental upbringing that always told me, oh, well, the world doesn't want Jesus and that's why they reject all of these things. And all of these things were usually specific political ideologies that not only have nothing to do with Jesus, but are antichrist.
I would argue that the world wants Jesus.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people, once they hear the story about Jesus, Gandhi has been, whether or not it's accurate, has been attributed with the saying, "I would be Christian if not for the Christians."
Yeah, it's that it's a shame that so hard upon the heels of Christ came the Christians.
That's that same,
yeah. Or I care for your Christ, I do not care for your Christians.
Yeah. And that idea of, I think people, when they see Jesus, they're attracted to that and they're drawn to that. It's when we come along and put all this other stuff afterwards. And quite honestly, a lot of times in our denominations, we do just what the Pharisees do. We have something valuable, something we want to protect, in this case, Jesus, and we put all these hedges around it and all these codes and rules and regulations and everything. And we put all this baggage around it, and then next thing we know, we make people twice the demon of hell that we are. We're whitewashed tombs, and we're all these things that Jesus was saying to the Pharisees. And I like how you said that, babe, because part of what we have to do is, first off, if people look at the church suspiciously, I don't think there's no reason for it. I think that there might be some legitimate reason for it.
And we're going to get to that definitely in our next Unchurched Friends.
Right. And so I think part of it is, and maybe so I'll table that until we get to the Unchurched Friends thing, but that's something we should think about. Is that when they're looking at suspiciously, maybe there's a reason.
Maybe there's a reason. Yeah. And that definitely will tie into the next one more. It was just that was a very, that phrase really stood out to me because I was fed that rhetoric my whole life.
You know, the fact that we're a persecuted minority.
Yeah, when we're literally running the country. I mean, and I will give it to the Adventists that they don't always feed into that, but then they get that whole Sunday laws are coming for a Sabbath kind of thing, which is in the same vein. Like, it's just, we just swapped it for our little segment.
Our very little niche.
But Christianity is not an oppressed minority in the United States. It's not. It's 0%. It's not. So that bothered me, that feeding into that rhetoric is always dangerous because of what it means here in this context that he's writing in.
Well, I mean, the fact that they swear in politicians, they've been swearing in politicians on a Bible for the last how many decades until just recently.
Yeah, when you could pick a different,
I mean, that should tell you everything right there.
Yeah.
Like,
So.
I'm with you.
Yeah, it was just that I don't like to feed that. That very because it is dangerous.
It's dangerous
to feed that lie.
Well, it's dangerous delusion, is what.
Yes, that is what it is. So our next one: how do I love my unchurched friends? Here, I got the sense by the end of the chapter that by unchurched, we're actually talking about people that have left the church, not fully non-Christians, lapsed members more than anything else. Particularly because the illustration is Levi/Matthew.
And again, in our context here, a lot of the people that we're dealing with, a lot of our friends and stuff, a lot of people we know that don't go to church probably went to church at some point or another. And again, part of this whole going against that rhetoric, we're probably part of Christianity at some point, because Christianity Christianity even now, it's still incredibly predominant as a faith choice in the United States. Now, more and more people are choosing unchurched or choosing non-religious.
We're seeing a huge shift, like I've said before during our conversations. If you're talking millennials or older, this is a pretty safe assumption, right? That they were raised in either Christianity or some kind of formal religion. It's still rare for me to meet people who weren't.
Yeah.
I have literally one friend I can think of that was not raised in a Christian church.
Yeah.
You know, that's not going to be the case anymore, though.
Right.
Interestingly.
That's going to be changing.
Yeah, with my students and with Generation Z, with the children of millennials, the number of fully unchurched, as in never raised in the church, has just skyrocketed in an exponential way. So that's not going to, right now of all adults, it is a pretty safe assumption that most of them were raised at least somewhat in the church.
Have some experience with Christianity.
Yeah. Christmas and Easter.
Now, no close to zip about it, and couldn't tell you much of the doctrine of Christianity.
We have lifelong members that
fair.
are low on the understanding of them.
But I think that there's I think this is an important point that Ice is making, is that it seems as if he's talking more about lapsed members than completely unchurched. And the question we always have to ask ourselves is, why did they leave? And I think all too often, Adventists especially, come to conclusions, they just couldn't handle it, there
was some fault of theirs or some
they're too
defect
worldly,
of theirs.
there's sins,
right,
etc., etc. And oftentimes we view leaving Adventism, even if they're going to another denomination of Christianity, as essentially being lost. And I think we have to be very careful when we start using that sort of rhetoric, with our unchurched friends. Because I think that all too often, and they've experienced this a lot of members presuming and assuming why they left. But the funny thing is that no one really ever asks why they leave. Like, what was it about it, you know? And I've got some more to contribute to that, but if you wanted to throw some stuff in there.
The whole first, almost the whole chapter is a retelling of Levi / Matthew's calling.
The tax collector,
yeah. So that's what's kind of going on there. This picture, though, really bothers me.
What's going on there?
It's an upside down man. Like he's there.
Doing
See
a
it?
handstand.
Yeah, see his feet are coming up towards the sky. But the way that it's published, it literally looks like somebody being hung. It really bothered me. When I first turned the page and saw that, it was
an accident? I wonder
jarring.
if it was intentional.
I don't know, but it's on their website too. I was like, of all the pictures to choose, that one really actually bothers me a lot. I don't like it. That's apropos of nothing. I even wrote "what the heck" across the top of that page because I don't like it.
Maybe they should have just done it the other way.
Yeah, the other way would have been better. But it just, with the feet and the pointed and the sky, I had a pretty negative visceral reaction to that.
Yeah.
Neither here nor there with the text, but it really bothered me. So the couple of the main points, the main point from this chapter is that you never let religion get in the way of or be greater than your relationships. And I love that. I love that that the relationships are more important.
Well, especially since in this context, especially if you're dealing with lapsed church members or lapsed Christians, you're also dealing with a lot of hurt there. And I think that you have to be really, really careful when you, well, just like with any hurt, like whenever one of your friends is hurting, you want to be careful and sensitive about how they're hurting, and then you want to be really careful with the help you offer along the way with that. Yeah.
So I liked in Levi Matthews' story, that one of the ideas that Ice puts in his mind is he wonders, might the church find its relevance once more in his heart? Could there be a new way that works and makes sense to common people? And I mean, that really connects with a lot of what you've been doing in your ministry, kind of what we talk about at the church. Is that the church needs to be relevant?
Yeah.
Hey, Journey. As sometimes happens with the technological stuff, sometimes we have certain things, like, for example, you're trying to wrap up a video about the 12 people you love, and all of a sudden your phone stops recording. It's one of the fun things that we're discovering along the way as we're shifting into this format of digital presence with you as we're doing church together from a distance. So thank you so much for your patience and your love and your support through all of this. We pretty much said everything we wanted to say at the end of that first section where I'm obviously dressed differently. But we just wanted to say that next week we're going to be coming together to talk about the application guide. So we're going to be talking about very practically making it so that we can love the people. Like, how do we love the people that we love? And so we're going to talk more about that next week. And then we're going to be in the process of picking another book, because once we're done talking about the application guide, we're going to move on to another book to try to work on. And we'll give you a heads up about which book that will be, so you can order it ahead of time, maybe through Amazon or digitally, so that you can follow along with us. But until we see you next week, just remember that God loves you very much. Remember to love each other. And also remember that we love you at Journey SDA. And no distance can change that. Thanks, guys. See you later.